Welcome back to Fans First Network, where Shane Sandersfeld and Steve Geller bring you the picks to click. We hope you're enjoying so far the NHL picks that we've given a click. Our Florida Panthers pick is not going very good, but the Edmonton-Calgary pick that we both pick is actually pretty interesting. That series looks like it's going to be very good. But anyways, we are on to tennis, French Open. So that starts tomorrow. We're doing this on Saturday afternoon, and we're going to talk through kind of some best bets, people that we think might do well from the United States, and then semis and finals picks. So it looks like a pretty interesting French Open. Just talking off quick thoughts on how the draws went. Obviously, there's one big player on the women's side with Iga Swiatek. We'll talk about her odds in just a second, but she's a clear favorite, having won 28 straight. She's lost one set in her last 20 matches. And then you go back over to the men's side, and we talked about this before the draw came out. Alcaraz, Nadal, Djokovic, how is that going to go? And then they all get lumped together. So this should make for a pretty interesting tournament here and pretty interesting picks. What do you think about what we're looking at, just at a broad overview picture here?
I'm really excited to get into this because I would say for the first time in maybe 10, 15 years, this is a complete role reversal in terms of the French Open, men's and women's. It used to be Nadal would be a heavy favorite, and you would look and say, who might be able to, get in his path and stop him, but he was always kind of the surefire bet. This year, it feels like there are multiple ways you can go on the men's side, but it's the women's side where you're looking at a heavy favorite in Swiatek and trying to figure out if there's anybody that can thwart her path. So this is what's going to make the French Open really unique, and I'm really excited to watch both of these. To have a men's draw where there's so many different ways it can go, and you have a stacked half, is going to make for some really interesting matchups that I think are going to be great for some people who might not be as well versed in tennis as the two of us are, and they're going to get a chance to see some really good matches without having to wait to the semifinals or the finals. They're going to happen sometimes before we even get to the quarters.
Yeah, on the women's side, I think it's the lower half of the opposite bracket of Swiatek is just loaded with players, and it's going to just kind of be like a battle to get out of there. And whoever gets that semis, will be somebody who's battle tested and actually probably has a chance to be rolling by that point in time. So I think that's kind of interesting. As you mentioned, usually in the past, it's always been Nadal, 13-time French Open champion. You just kind of write him in and pen and just say, okay, next, what's going on the women's side. This time, he's good enough. He won the Australian. He's good enough to obviously be a good favorite. But at the same point, you've got Alcaraz, who's playing like a young Nadal going into this. And then you have Djokovic, who looked really shaky about 3 weeks ago and all of a sudden looks ready for the French Open. So I think that makes things really interesting as we go all the way around here.
And this is also a tournament where you really have to do your due diligence on injuries. I mean, everyone's talking about the top three. They're talking about Alcaraz. They're talking about Joker. They're talking about Nadal's injury. But you also have to look at Medvedev. Medvedev's on the side where he's not a great French Open player, but he's got a pretty favorable draw. But how much is the hernia surgery that he had? How much is that going to play into his run to try to get to the semis or even to the finals?
And he only played one match on clay leading up to it. He lost to Richard Gasquet at the beginning of the week. But like you said, he's such a good player. And last year, everybody talked about how bad he was on clay. He made it to the quarterfinals last year. So clearly he's learning the surface as he goes along. And there are some young players who seem to be getting better at the surface. That'll make things interesting. And we haven't even talked about Stefanos Tsitsipas, who might be, last year at this time, he was playing as well as anyone on clay. And he's one of the top 3-4 players on clay right now, and he can beat any of those guys on any day.
And I know that we'll have some points to make at the end of this on kind of some different ways to play it. But the one thing you can always say going into the French Open, as opposed to any of the other 4 majors, is you are not going to see seeded players just go all the way to the finals in this. This is the tournament where you see a lot of unranked, unseeded players that make strong plays, because this is their tournament. They're very good on clay, and this is where they really make hay.
That's a good segue for us to head to the women's side. What I find interesting is, last year in a lot of the Grand Slams didn't really happen in the first one when Ash Barty won, who actually promptly retired pretty shortly after she won the Australian. But last year in all the Grand Slams on the women's side, it was just so wide open. I mean, obviously with Raducanu being a qualifier and winning the U.S. Open. You had Wimbledon and French, who things got tossed up there. Krejcikova came out of nowhere to win the French Open last year. So really just, you kind of toss it up in the air. It's funny, Swiatek was dominant. Swiatek was dominant in 2020 when the French Open got moved on the calendar, and she was dominant. But remember, there was really nobody there. That was during COVID. And now you get the pressure of having people back there. Last year, Swiatek wasn't able to continue that dominance, lost in the quarterfinals. And now this year, we'll kind of lead into the odds here. She is plus 110. The next closest person is plus 1,200. 12 to 1 is your best best odds or the lowest odds compared to Swiatek, who is almost 1 to 1 practically at plus 110. So it is really interesting. Let's start off real quick. We just talked through Swiatek. She's plus 110. Obviously, as we're talking about our best bets, what we're going to do here is we're going to give our 5 picks. What we're going to do is maybe our best bet, who's closer to a favorite, good mid shot bet, good long shot bet, and then 2 other bets that we just like. So let's start off with Swiatek. Obviously, she would have to be a favorite. It'd be crazy after she's won 28 straight matches to say, yeah, I don't think she's going to win the French. But what's your thoughts on kind of how we would say value-wise for her and what you would be getting if you're betting on her?
My thoughts on Swiatek are that the fact that Vegas is making her such a heavy favorite leads me to say that there's probably a good chance that she will run the table. I mean, typically on a major, Vegas does not give you a minus number on anyone. I mean, it's been a long time, probably since, Serena on hard court would get a minus number whenever she was playing. To see, as you pointed out earlier in the week in our correspondence, her number keeps moving down where she's becoming more of a favorite. And that leads me to believe that Vegas is trying to find a way to cover themselves on this. They know how well she's playing. And I mean, her side of the draw, I think, is to a degree favorable. Now, the one thing that she has is 2 of the top 3 favorites in the women's draw have a potential to meet before we get to the quarterfinals. Halep and Swiatek is going to be an amazing matchup. Her biggest headache could come before she even gets to the final 16. Now, I also think Badosa is someone who's really playing well, had a great performance in the Sydney Open. So that will be another tough matchup. But I think the deeper that Swiatek gets in this, I think the matchups actually become more favorable for her.
Well, what's also interesting about her draw is if you look at it, she's got a possibility to play Jelena Ostapenko in the 4th round. That's the last person to beat her. She beat her, I think, back in Qatar. That was a while ago. And that was on the hard courts. The other thing is the only person who's really even given her a match in the last 3 months, basically, on clay is Samsonova. And Samsonova is someone she could meet in the 3rd round. Yeah. So, and like you said, Halep is then someone she could also meet in the 4th round. So there are if there are people who can give her a good match, there are a lot of them kind of looking on her side of the half, at least based on her recent matchups. So I just think it'll be really interesting to see. It's weird because she's so young. She only has 1 major tournament title, and it was the French Open about a year and a half, maybe a little less than 2 years ago. And she's this deep of a favorite, which just shows the form she's in. It's really weird because if you think about it, her situation, if there were 2 other people like a Serena and a Barty around, she would be similar to what Alcaraz is. But because those 2 dominant forces aren't around, she is the dominant force.
Yeah, and I really think she may be the future of women's tennis here in the next 2, 3, 4, even 5 years. She just seems to have that quiet confidence. She looks very comfortable on all surfaces. I think she understands being this big of a favorite, how important it would be to win the French again. And the one thing I do want to point out, though, is there's not a lot of attention on Halep right now, despite the fact that she has the 3rd best odds to win the French. One of the things to keep your eye on is if you're looking for a flyer with Halep, and this as a big fan of hers, she's kind of hit and miss. If you could get a bad Halep and it could be over in straight sets, 6-2, 6-2. But if Halep shows up and she would find a way to win that match, Halep has a chance to go the distance.
Well, and this brings us into the next part of this conversation. I'm going to give kind of my best, I guess we kind of gave our favorite right there. So we'll count that as one. We can come back and see if we like other ones that are better. But the other one that I like, the player who is actually not on Swiatek's side of the bracket, is Maria Sakkari. And Maria Sakkari was actually the player who knocked out Swiatek last year. She has been so close. She's made the semis in a couple different Grand Slams last year. She's a 20-1 plus 2,000, and I like the way that she plays. She really hasn't, this has really been an interesting women's clay court season because there are two players who come into this tournament in form. We talked about Iga Swiatek. She's obviously the one who's most in form. The other one is Ons Jabeur. She comes in, she has a 16-3 clay court record. She won a tournament, I believe, a couple of weeks ago. She made it to the finals of the Rome tournament where she lost to Swiatek. So she's in good form. But getting back to Sakkari, to me, she's just kind of a consistent, steady player. She always seems to keep in the mix. She does a good job usually at avoiding early round upsets, which is what you have to look at when you look at these brackets, especially on the women's side. There were a couple Grand Slams last year where you looked in the fourth round and like half the seeds had been cleared out. So that's always a possibility in this. So that's the first one I'm going to go with. Sakkari is probably one of my best bets at 20-1, just because she's not on Swiatek's side of the bracket. She beat her last year, and she's a steady player. Now, I don't know. She's still trying to figure out how to win finals and close out. She's not great at that, but I like her. That's who I'm going to take to start off here.
The one that I really have a good feeling about, and I think if Halep has a chance to beat Swiatek, could really get on a good run, is I'm really big on Badosa. I think she's playing really good tennis right now. I love what I'm seeing leading up to the French Open. I think she's really starting to come around in terms of getting that confidence and starting to believe, hey, when I come into these majors, I'm a legitimate player. I mean, she's the 3 seed here. She's got a really good draw, and I think that she has a chance at 18-1 to be a real value pick. If you get, she's not a great matchup against Swiatek, but if Halep gets past Swiatek, I like Badosa in that matchup. The other one, and this is why you want to listen to this collaboration of Sandersfeld and Geller, is I'm actually going to go with Anisimova to knock off Sakkari. I like her at 25-1. I actually like that she's coming in on a couple tough losses, and I think she's going to rebound here. She had a good French Open run a few years ago before she kind of lost her way for a couple of years. I think we start to see her move back on the path that looked like she was going to be a major champion. She's got a little bit of a tougher draw. As you mentioned, Jabeur is going to be very difficult to beat, but she's another one of my value picks. I like Badosa and I like Anisimova.
The other one that's going to be really interesting about Anisimova, and I think this is a good argument in your favor as to if she wins this match, I mean, you feel like she's in great form. She plays Osaka right off the bat. I mean, that is the toughest first round matchup out of everybody, but it's one of those ones you look, I mean, she's 25-1. Osaka is 50-1. Osaka is not in great form on clay. Whoever comes out of that match, I think, is going to be feeling pretty good about their next steps. And Anisimova has to be considered a slight favorite in that matchup based on the surface they're playing on and based on the recent form. So I do like that. I think that's an interesting one. The other one that I was going to go with, and again, this is more a mid favorite, so I'm still probably going to have to give a long shot here. You know, I didn't realize this until I looked. Coco Gauff made she made the round of 8, or she made the quarterfinals last year. She is a player who, you know, kind of keeps gaining experience and gaining the right. She's almost like taking the slow Swiatek path. Like you know, she's kind of like slowly building, where Swiatek just burst onto the scene and wins. But I like what Coco Gauff is doing. You know, I think clay is a pretty decent surface for her. Her draw, again, I really tried to look at players when I picked this to win it, players who were not on the side of Swiatek, because I really feel like you're going to have to get to the semis, then maybe have a shot. The only tough part about it is if you're the two that I picked, both Sakkari, I mean, Sakkari actually beat her last year, but Gauff in this case, you just hope that someone else is in the finals. Because if Swiatek's in the finals, I think it's lights out. You're not going to beat her in the finals. You're just hoping someone takes her out in the round of, you know, the 4th round, the quarters, 16, somewhere in there. Because to me, if Swiatek gets to the semifinals, you can forget about it. That means she's rolling. That means she's in her form. I know the pressure will build, but she'll be locked in. But I like Gauff as one of my other picks. Like I said, we'll give 5 picks here. We both kind of wasted one by, I think we both basically said Swiatek is one of the players. We're like, we'll get to our picks for the finals. But right now, you know, my 2 picks, I would say I have Gauff and I have Sakkari to start off. So do you have one that you're looking at maybe in that I guess 33-1 or lower, that like long shot range. Is there anyone that jumps out at you there? One of the interesting ones out before you talk, I will say Krejcikova, last year's championship, she's been injured since February, hasn't played much, but she is 33-1. So I'll throw it back to you.
Well, we started on the same page with Swiatek, and then we kind of went off a little bit on I'm on Anisimova, you're on Sakkari. We're back with Krejcikova. I just don't see how at 33-1, and I understand they don't make repeat or a champion who's going for a repeat championship 33-1 very, very often, but she's a competitor. It would be a little bit different if this was Pliskova, who sometimes I question whether she's the sort of person who really gets into it, is as competitive. But Krejcikova, to me, she's here to win. And I know that she's had some issues, but 33-1 for somebody that knows this surface, has won on this surface at the highest level. I've got Krejcikova going all the way. I'll hold off. I've got her going quite a ways. So Krejcikova to me at 33-1, I don't see how you don't take a flyer on her, especially since I didn't take a flyer on Rich Strike, which I'm still kicking myself about. I'm not going to let that happen again. We're going to turn the tennis into the horse racing. I'm going to put a little bit on 33-1 with Krejcikova, but then I'm also with you. Coco Gauff, to me, I really like how Coco Gauff and Danielle Collins, as Americans, they bring out the best, I think, in each other, and they play really hard. I don't think this is a great surface for Collins. I do think that Gauff is starting to figure this surface out, and I do think that Gauff not only will beat who do I have here? I've got Gauff going to the quarters with a chance against Krejcikova. That'll be a tough match, but I'm with you. I've got Gauff going a little bit of ways here as an American.
You just mentioned Collins. That was another one I really like. I don't know if I have her down as one of my 5, but if you ask me to pick a 6th or 7th, I think Collins would be right there. I just love, no matter what surface, she competes. She is a competitor, and she gets after it. She's not scared of anyone. She's one of those type of people, if she made it to the semis, she would face Swiatek. And that would be somebody I would trust to come in and not be afraid of her and to just go right after. Now, would she be able to beat her? I'm not sure about that. But I do like Collins a lot. Collins at 40-1 is a solid one. The one I'm going to go with for my other pick here is Rybakina at 33-1. Rybakina last year, she made it all the way to, I believe, she made it to the quarters last year again. And I'm picking people here who kind of, have that feel for clay court, who feel pretty good about doing well. Doesn't mean they can't get picked off in the first or second round and make me look bad here. But Rybakina has been in pretty decent form. She's just a consistent player. And I do feel like she's somebody, she would meet Swiatek in the semis if she got there. If Swiatek is still there, obviously. But that's somebody I think would be a good flyer. And then you just hope Swiatek gets upset.
And that's where you have to understand the numbers a little bit. Is Rybakina is listed at 33-1, but that number isn't because I think they're viewing her as being a longer shot. It's because she has to go. She has a very tough draw. I mean, there's Badosa sitting there. There's Sabalenka potentially. She's going to run up against the number 1 seed or Halep. So if she was in an easier draw, I think her number could be as low as 16, 18-1. Her 33-1 is only because her path is so difficult. It has nothing to do with her ability to win on clay.
Yeah, and I noticed that you will notice when we talk on the men's side as well. One of the things I noticed is that there are players who are better than their odds, but they happen to be in the wrong side of the draw. And right. I mean, especially on the men's side, you've got a few guys who, if they were on the other side away from Alcaraz, Djokovic, and Nadal, they might be much lower odds, but they are some pretty long shots there because of that. So I think that's an interesting part of it as well. The other long shot I'm going to give you that I think's played pretty well. This is a really big long shot. I like Pegula, as the U.S. She is 66-1. I mean, Pegula is I think she's another one who just is, no matter who she plays, she doesn't get intimidated. She's a tough. She plays well on the surface, and she would play Swiatek as soon as the round of 16. That's why she's 66-1, because she is a top 15 player in the world, and she's very consistent. If she wasn't on that side of the bracket, you could probably cut her odds in half. So that's probably the other one I was going to say that I really like.
I'm with you on that one. As soon as you said that name, I thought you're stealing my notes because I don't even think she's going to have that difficult of a time against Pliskova. I think she's a gamer after first round exit, had a third round exit last year. So again, another player that I think is figuring it out. Another one of these young female competitors from the US that I think is really starting to form a nice core for the Americans. And I've got Pegula going to the quarterfinals as well, where she unfortunately runs into Swiatek.
The last one I'm going to throw out there, and this is an extra one, and so we don't have to go too much further with this. The one person I'm intrigued by, I don't think she's had a great season, but I just love the way she played in last year's U.S. Open, and she seems like she could be a good clay court player, is Leylah Fernandez. She's sitting there at 100-1. I mean, why not? Again, I don't love her. That's somebody who I could turn on the TV tomorrow or Monday, and she might be out in the first round. But I just think that's a pretty decent play because that's somebody who I just love the fight. I love what she's done. She showed what she could do by getting to the finals of the U.S. Open, and she's a young player whose trajectory is pointing up.
Yep. I'm going to give you my last one is going to be an unranked player. I'm going to go with Andreescu. She's going to run up against Anisimova, but if we don't get the Anisimova that I think we're going to get, I mean, Andreescu's had success on the tour, is a very good player, unranked here, unseeded. But I think that's another one. You know, Jabeur, we don't know necessarily what we're going to get, and she's still trying to break through to that other side. I mean, her best is only 2 quarterfinals, one at the Australian, one at Wimbledon. So Andreescu, if she gets rolling, is a dangerous player that I might sprinkle a little bit on and just see what happens.
Yeah, Jabeur seems like, I like Jabeur, and she's playing really well. But it seems too easy to say, oh, she's going to play Swiatek in the final. I just don't see that happening. So 12-1, Jabeur, that's good odds, but not probably one of my favorite value plays in that. The next thing I was going to do real quick, and I think we've kind of answered it here as we're looking through it, was going to look at the U.S. Players. See, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 U.S. players. The only ones who really have odds on them right now, we mentioned Pegula. Keys is another one. She's at 12,500 to 1, or she's 125-1. Madison Brengel 250-1. Anisimova 25-1. Goff 28-1, and Sloane Stephens is 125-1. So there's a few others in there that are out there, but I'm just mentioning the ones who actually have the best numbers. I'm just going to say, I think we already nailed this one. Pegula is probably my favorite to go the furthest. Although I will say Anisimova and Goff, I really like because they're both on the other side that Swiatek's not on. So I think that bodes well for them. Actually, I'm going to change what I just said. I'm going to say Coco Gauff is the player that I think goes the furthest out of the U.S. players.
I was getting ready to counter your Pegula with Gauff, and then you went back and grabbed it ahead of me. No, I'm with you. I think Gauff, especially if Krejcikova is not in her right form, Gauff could get through that very easily. And I would go Gauff as my American to have the potential to go the furthest. And then I would go Anisimova, and then I would go Pegula.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. The other one is Sloane Stephens is playing a qualifier to start. She's on that side, and she doesn't have that much pressure on her, although I think her third round matchup gets really tough, if I'm not mistaken. I believe that she will play. Yeah, she could run into Krejcikova pretty quickly. Now, if Krejcikova is not playing well, or if she gets bumped off, Stephens' side of the bracket opens up. And Sloane Stephens, as she's shown, is capable of losing in the first round or winning it all. Like her variance is so crazy. So let's go to the semifinal picks here real quick. And I'm just going to look. I'm starting off on the side of the bracket that's not Swiatek. So the side we're on Jabeur, you got Anisimova, Leylah Fernandez, Bencic, Raducanu, Kerber, and Kvitova are your seeded players right now. So who do you like getting out from that side right there?
My semifinal there is going to be Krejcikova and Jabeur, and I'm taking Krejcikova to. I think she's going to find the form. I'm not buying that she's not right. I think she'll find a way to gut through it, and I've got her over Jabeur to get to the final.
I am going to take. I actually am not. I don't. Krejcikova, I have a little bit of doubts about. On that side, I gave you kind of the two that I like, which are Goff and Sakkari. I'm going to go for Sakkari versus Jabeur, and I'm going to go Sakkari to go to the championship. I've picked Sakkari to go pretty far. You know, I guess she's kind of like my Calgary Flames of women's tennis. I just keep picking her over and over again. The other one I want to make mention of, two that I see in here, Azarenka, we didn't talk about her. I think she's been playing pretty well, and she played Swiatek pretty tough last week in a matchup. I see her as somebody who might be able to cause some trouble. Belinda Bencic is another one we didn't talk about. And then the weird one, we mentioned her name, but Emma Raducanu, who I just don't think is quite ready yet. But it feels like she could show up and like all of a sudden play well and then be like, oh crap, that we didn't realize this version of her was going to show up and she could roll too. So I just wanted to make comments of those before we went to the other side of the bracket.
No, those are good ones to bring up. And I think you're onto something there with Azarenka, because I'm not seeing a terribly difficult early portion for her. She has really played well the last few years, made some deep runs. This could be another one. She's always a gamer. You never have to question that she's going to bring it. She's one of my favorite women's tennis players to watch. And if she gets it rolling, I mean, again, she's on the opposite side of Swiatek. She could be someone to keep an eye on too at that 15 seed.
So then we go to the other side. Who do you like out of your other out of the other group? Obviously, Swiatek is a pretty heavy favorite. Who do you see on the other side of the semis?
I'm pretty much rolling with chalk here. I'm going to go with Swiatek versus Badosa. Badosa I really, really like, and I may have taken Badosa to win the whole thing if she wasn't on the same side as Swiatek. But I've got Swiatek over Badosa to get to the final for me against Krejcikova.
I'm going to go a little bit weird here. I think this side that Swiatek is on, I think she's going to win. I just can't really pick against her. She'll see some tough matchups. Like you said, Halep could be tough. The other person we didn't mention on her side is Zidansek. Zidansek made it all the way to, I believe, she made to the semifinals last year. And she is also on that side of the bracket. So it's not an easy bracket for Swiatek. I think they've stacked it up pretty good for her. I'm going to go Swiatek, and the other one is a hard one that I'm having trouble with here. But as I buy time, I'm going to go with Swiatek versus Rybakina. I think Sabalenka is the highest seeded person on the other side of that bracket. Or no, I'm sorry, Badosa is. You're right, Badosa is. But Badosa and Sabalenka, they've played well, but they're not in form quite in the same way that Jabeur and Swiatek are. And you've got Kudermetova on that side. And then the other person I really like, who I think is actually going to take out Sabalenka, Danielle Collins, like we said. I think she takes out Sabalenka. I think Rybakina takes out Badosa, although I could see somebody like Kudermetova taking her out as well. But I'm going to go Swiatek versus Rybakina as my semis, and then I'm going to go Swiatek. So Swiatek Zachary is in my finals, and I'm going to take Swiatek to win it.
History would say that you're probably on the better side than I am right now, because I'm looking at my semifinals and I've got a 1, a 2, a 3, and a 6 seed, which I think we know at the French Open is not probably the way that you want to go. So you've got a little bit more of a mix with your seeds, and that's probably the way the French will ultimately fall.
Yeah, it's hard to know. I mean, it is one of those things where there are 2 players who are in form right now, and there's a couple others. So it'll be interesting to see how that falls from there. Okay, so we got the men's side now. I'm going to pull that up because I had a bunch of stuff here with the women's side. But the men's side, we talked about it quite a bit. You've got your 3 favorites that are pretty much in stone with Alcaraz, Joker, and Nadal. Actually, what's been interesting with the odds I looked at today is because of the fact that they're all on the same side of the bracket and Stefanos Tsitsipas is on the other side, his odds have become the same as Rafael Nadal's, which I find amazing. Also, that has a little bit to do with the injuries that Nadal's managing right now. He got upset early in the Rome tournament because of the fact that people, he hadn't played in a while, and people were, the injuries were still bothering him. So that kind of lingers as we move in here. So let's start off with the favorites. Out of the 3, Alcaraz, actually, let's say out of the 4, Alcaraz, Joker, Tsitsipas, Nadal. Not who do you think is going to win, but who do you think gives the best value?
I think the best value in this whole deal, and I'm not going to give away who I'm picking to win it, but I don't see how you don't take Tsitsipas here. Instead of trying to figure out of the 3, and trust me, as I referenced to you, I've actually changed my pick from earlier in the week out of those 3 as to who I see moving further down the line. But to me, Tsitsipas brings the best value. He's in with Medvedev, who I think we both know is probably not going to make a deep run here. That leaves, some other guys down here, Sinner, Rublev, guys I think Tsitsipas can handle for the most part. So with where you have his odds, you don't know what's going to play out on the other side, but I think you can feel pretty confident that you're going to get into this, 2-week span with a guy who's going to advance through and not have to take a whole lot of damage or have to play a lot of 4 or 5 setters. I think Tsitsipas is the best value of the entire French.
I think there are 2 people here who really want to play Carlos Alcaraz again and show that they are ready to beat him. Tsitsipas is one of them. Zverev is the other one. Those guys, it's like they're waiting for their turn, and Carlos Alcaraz just budged right in line in front of them.
Yep.
And I think they are hungry to do that. The one thing I think about Tsitsipas, there's 2 guys in this tournament who he has a mental block against, Nadal and Joker. If he has to play them, we don't know what to do. Maybe he's ready to play them. Maybe he's ready from last year's final. But I agree with you. Tsitsipas, there's nobody past those top 3 who I think is going to beat him in a match. It's just hard for me to imagine him getting upset the way he played last year at the French Open, the way he plays on clay. If it's somebody who's going to beat him, it's probably one of those 3 guys. There are a couple guys down at his side of the bracket who could, if they play well on their right day, would beat him. But there is a very clear hierarchy in men's tennis right now. And to me, Tsitsipas is sitting right at that like 3A mark with Alcaraz and with Zverev, and they're just trying to figure out when do Nadal and Djokovic go away, and when are we ready to step up and be the next guys. And Tsitsipas and all of them, they had their chance to win the U.S. Open. Not Alcaraz, he was too young, but a couple of years ago they had their chance to win the U.S. Open, and Team won it. So those guys still need to claim their first Grand Slam title, and they are all hungry to do it. So I agree, Tsitsipas is the best value from a favorite.
It's another reason, and you brought up a really good point, is this may be the first time where, to me, if Tsitsipas gets to the final and he faces Alcaraz, I don't think he's intimidated. I don't think he has to reference any past history like he would with a Joker and Nadal. Conversely, if he does end up facing one of those 2 veterans, those guys have to go through not only each other, but then Alcaraz, and then get to Tsitsipas. I don't think he's going to have, to your point, as much mental block this time. I think if he gets to Nadal, I think Nadal is going to be worn out. I really do. I think Nadal is not going to get by with a bunch of 3-setters like we've seen in the past. He's going to have to work. There's no chance he does a 3-setter against Djokovic. And if he beats Joker, there's no chance he has a 3-setter versus Alcaraz. I also think Joker is going to be in the same boat. Listen, he didn't play the previous major. He wasn't at the Australian. And I know you can say he's a veteran and it doesn't matter. Getting those sort of reps in are different than any other tournament. I think Joker, if he ends up against Tsitsipas, I would actually probably take Tsitsipas in that one. I think he's ready to break through his previous history. I think he's eager to prove against any of these guys he's ready to handle the situation. And that's why I just continue to think there's immense value on Tsitsipas in this tournament.
It's interesting because you have 2 different stories that back up that theory. One backs it up and one doesn't. The one that backs it up is Joker versus Medvedev in the U.S. Open final. He had nothing left. He had run out of gas. Joker and Nadal, they're going to have 1 or 2 tough matches, probably even before they play each other. And then through that could be tough. The one that doesn't back it up is last year's French Open, where Joker and Nadal played a crazy, insane match. Tsitsipas jumps out 2-0, and then Joker flips a switch and all of a sudden wins it. So that's what makes this so interesting, is that you really never have Nadal or Joker counted out until you actually are holding up that trophy. I'm going to go over to the next ones, the middle ones. One of my favorite ones that I like, and might be one that you like, this is a player we both like, Andre Rublev, sitting there at 33-1, and he's sitting in the side of the bracket that doesn't have any of those 3 guys in it. So I really like him as one of my other value plays.
My other value play is exactly in the same area of Rublev. On the other side, I really like Jannik Sinner here. I think Sinner is really starting to come of age. I think he's one of these guys that doesn't get a mental block. I think there's a big opportunity here for Sinner to kind of take an Alcaraz sort of step and become one of those guys that gets into that next level of, hey, this is a guy that we have to start looking, to count as a guy that can win a major. I don't like what I'm seeing from Rublev. I also think there's a lot of stuff going on politically that could affect Rublev in the French Open, and looking ahead to what is going to happen with him potentially at Wimbledon or of these future, future tennis matches. I'm big on Sinner right here. I think Sinner is an immense value. You're not getting as good of odds as you are as Rublev at 33-1. Sinner's at 28-1, but to me, that's still a real good value there. If you can find the right winner of the Rublev Sinner match, you're going Rublev. I kind of like Sinner here. I think there's good value there on Jannik.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, actually, that was one of the other guys I was considering because I think Sinner's playing pretty well. I think he's getting close to being ready. He's that next level under Tsitsipas and Zverev of like young guys waiting to break through, and he is still pretty young. So I like that pick as well. Rublev is in that same boat as well. I'm going to go a little bit more long shot. This is one I don't think he can win the tournament, but I do like. He just plays so well on the surface. Carino Busta. He's 66-1. He's a guy that I would say if this tournament goes haywire, everything flips upside down and you look up and there's a bunch of other names there and Tsitsipas is gone and, maybe Zverev has picked off one of the big guys. That's a guy who you're going to be like, oh my God, this guy's in the semis and he plays tennis. It's not the most exciting tennis, but I don't know. I believe it was him who played against Djokovic in the Olympics where he just frustrated him so much. And, he just does that to you. So at 66-1 on the right surface, I think that's a good play.
I'm right there with you. He's not a play that I'm saying to take a long way. The play that I would make on Carino Busta is if he gets into that Medved matchup, I would take the money line on Busta. I think Busta is going to win that match. He's a much better player on this surface. Medvedev is not very good on this surface. And then that would put him in a matchup with either Rublev or Sinner, which he also could win. I mean, he's got that chance to make a play to get him to the semifinals or take him in a match-by-match basis because he's so good. Another one that I really like, and this is probably going to surprise you, is I like Fokina to beat Zverev. I think he's a good player on this surface. And going back to my point of you never really know who the guys are that are lower seed or the higher seeds who aren't really talked about who are going to come through here. I like Fokina. And then an unranked guy that I like is Cecchinato from Italy. I think he's a guy that does well on this surface, has a pretty easy draw for his part. And he's a guy that I would throw a little bit on to maybe get 2 or 3 matches in.
Yeah, I'm going to give you 2 more long shots, and then we can focus on some of the other ones. Cam Norrie, I believe he just won a tournament today. So that's the only thing that worries me is I hate when these guys play right up to the French Open, but man, he is solid. He is just nails. He's very difficult to play against, veteran, and I just think he's going to be difficult to beat. He's in Alcaraz's bracket, but he's played Alcaraz in a couple tournaments, and he is not back down from him. Alcaraz has won, but in 5 sets might be different because those are 3-set matches you're talking about. The other one I like made it to the quarterfinals last year. Always a pain in the butt to play. Never good enough to win unless everything just goes haywire and gets cleared up. But Schwartzman, Diego Schwartzman, I mean, he is always capable of getting to the furthest. Let's put it this way. He usually gets as far as he possibly can in the tournament. He maximizes what he can do, and then he ends up playing one of the big guys, and that's where he usually falls off in these Grand Slams. But just look at the list of those Grand Slam tournaments. It's usually he loses to Joker or Nadal or somebody who's just clearly better than him. But he usually doesn't lose before that point, unless he just has a really off match. So I like those guys as long shots. Again, Schwartzman, Norrie, Carino Busta, somewhat of a long shot, Rublev, and then obviously, as we said, Tsitsipas best plays there. So that's where I'm thinking as we head in. Do you have any other picks that kind of jump out at you before we move on to the U.S. part of this?
Not so much, but I will say on those two picks that you mentioned, one of the things, and this is a really interesting matchup that I don't think a lot of people are going to talk about. It's almost a foregone conclusion that Alcaraz is going to get to the Joker Nadal match. To your point, that Norrie match it's a scary, underrated match. Norrie is a player. And the one thing that always concerns me about taking someone like Alcaraz is I don't like a guy coming in this hot on this good of a run. You have a tendency to maybe read a little bit too many of your press clippings, start looking ahead a little bit, just human nature. And Norrie is a guy that could really throw, a wrench into this whole deal. And we may not even see an Alcaraz Joker Nadal match if he doesn't take Norrie seriously. The other one is, outside of you, the biggest Schwartzman fan is Nadal. He wants Schwartzman to take Joker to 5, to push him, to set himself up where Joker's a little tired coming into that matchup. And it is not out of the realm of possibility to think that Schwartzman could not take Joker because we're not quite sure what Joker we're getting. And Schwartzman is not a guy you're going to put away or get to quit.
we'll get to this in the next segment as we make our picks, but I do think Alcaraz, out of the big three guys who we're talking about, I'm not going out on a limb here, but he is the most likely, I think, to get picked off before he actually gets to that point. I mean, not only does he have to, navigate what you talked about, Nori, and the expectations, but he also has to beat Zverev to get there too. Yeah. And Zverev I guarantee somewhere in Zverev, he got embarrassed by him in Rome in the finals. He has his name circled, and I know he wants that matchup again. Whether he gets there or not is a big question. But there's a lot of guys gunning for Alcaraz. And let's put it this way: Alcaraz is, his big conquering moment of this last in Madrid, where he beat Nadal and he beat Djokovic. That was in his home, and everybody was rooting for him. It's going to be very different in France. So. Let's quickly go to the U.S. guys. There's not much to talk about here because honestly, these guys are all, like, most of them are sitting in that Djokovic, Nadal, Alcaraz, Bermuda triangle. I don't think very many of them are going to able to get that far. The best odds in the Americans, I was just looking at this. The best odds is Taylor Fritz. 200-1 is your best American odd here. You've got Brooksby, you've got guys like Isner, Korda, Tommy Paul. Those guys are actually seeded. TFO, and Opelka is actually the other one who's lower than 500-1. Most of them are 500-1, but he's 450-1. So who do you have going the furthest out of the U.S. guys that you're looking at here?
I don't have anybody making the quarterfinals for the U.S. I would say probably your best bet. I mean, Opelka's going up against Nadal, so that pretty much immediately tells me that he's done. I think Fritz has your best bet. Like I said, I think there's a chance that Zverev could get upset, which would play into Fritz's hands. And I think Fritz is a gamer. But Fritz would be my play. There's not a lot to get excited for about the American men in the French. That would be the one that I would probably consider. But outside of that, I tried to find a way to put your guy TFO in there, but he does not have a great track record at the French Open. And I just couldn't find a way to make that happen.
Yeah, it is tough. I was actually going to say TFO because TFO is one of the few who's not on that side. The problem with TFO is, I mean, he actually has a pretty decent draw, but he's too inconsistent. I mean, I'd like to get him to about the fourth round. I think he can get to the fourth round. So I am going to make him my pick here. But on the other end, I don't know. You never know what you're going to get with them. The other two I wanted to make mention of, Tommy Paul is your other seeded American who's not in that craziness of the Djokovic, Nadal, Alcaraz. And the last one I'll say is Sebastian Korda. And Korda is the last person to beat Alcaraz. He beat him in a tournament in Portugal. So I like Korda. I just don't like, he has to play Alcaraz in the third round. So I'm not going to pick him to go the furthest. But I would say upset watch. Keep that one circled because I think Korda can give him a good match. And he's his age, so he's not like, get this guy out of here. He's young. He's running circles around me. But he's also not intimidating him. So that's a good combination. So we'll speed up here real quick, and we'll get to the what do we think for the semifinals. We'll start off on the side that isn't the side we're talking about with Alcaraz, Nadal, and Joker. Who do you have on the other side of that getting to the semifinals?
I've got Tsitsipas, and he's going to end up with a pretty good draw. I've got him against Cecchinato. I like Cecchinato to make a little bit of a run, which will play into Tsitsipas's hands because that would be a pretty easy match. So I've got Tsitsipas over Cecchinato to get to the semis. And then on the bottom side, I've got PCB knocking off Medvedev, and I've got Sinner over Rublev, and I've got Sinner over Busta.
Okay. Yeah, for me, I think I agree. Tsitsipas I've got on one side. As I'm looking at this, I do tend to agree. I think I'm going to actually go with Rublev. So I'm kind of going chalk here. I do like Sinner, and I think that's going to be really the tough matchup. And I believe Sinner and Rublev would play before they get to they play in the quarters, I think, or maybe the round of 16. But I'll take Sinner, and I'll take Rublev, and I will take Tsitsipas to get to the semifinals. All right, here we go. Here's the one that we're wondering about. So on the Djokovic, Alcaraz, Nadal side, who do you have coming out of that?
I'll go to the bottom side. I've got Alcaraz advancing. over Fokina. I think that Alcaraz gets into the semifinals. I mean, we talked about the Norrie matchup, and it could be a dangerous one, but I think Alcaraz will get through that and get on to the semis. And then Joker versus Nadal. I'm going to go with Nadal here. I think it actually plays into Nadal's. It's going to be beneficial to him to get some of the tougher matches earlier in the French Open as opposed to later. I think Joker might be a little bit rusty. I think Nadal is going to hold things together physically early on in the tournament, and I consider this early on in the quarterfinal that he gets by Joker. So I will have a Nadal Alcaraz semifinal.
I'm going to go Nadal as well. Joker's playing really well right now. So part of me thinks that if they play head to head, I still think Joker is capable of beating him. But I just think Nadal, after what I saw in the Australian Open and seeing him in the French Open in the past, I'm going to take Nadal. That's where I'm going from there. Here's the other part. I got Zverev, I think, coming out of there. I think Alcaraz actually has some landmines here. We talked about him a little bit. We got Korda in the third round. There's guys like Kechenov and Norrie and even Kechenov and Norrie waiting for him in the fourth round. And the other thing that I'm wondering about, this is a huge wild card. He has looked absolutely terrible. But God, if Dominic Thiem shows up in his first match and all of a sudden starts playing well, I mean, you don't know. Then that becomes a really, really tough side of the bracket. It already is pretty tough, and I don't think that's going to happen. I think Thiem right now, I think I texted you, he's playing like a challenger, like a qualifier right now. But he's Dominic Thiem. If he shows up and all of a sudden his wrist feels better, look out. But for him right now, I'm going to go Zverev and I'm going to go Nadal. And then so my semifinals would be Zverev, Nadal, Tsitsipas, and Rublev. I'm going to go Tsitsipas versus Nadal, and I'm actually going to go Nadal to win a 14th French Open.
Wow. I can say right now, I did not see that coming at all.
Yeah. Yeah, it doesn't feel like going out on much of a limb, but I think it's kind of going out on a limb in the context of what's going on.
See, I would actually argue this time that it is going out on a limb. And the part that I keep coming back to, which makes these predictions so difficult for me, looking at Vegas putting Alcaraz and Joker around the plus 220, plus 225, and having Nadal plus 400. I mean, people that don't watch a lot of tennis are looking at that and saying, I get a 4-1 shot on Nadal. That tells me that they really don't believe he can make it the entire 2 weeks and get all the way to the final. But again, I like the fact that Nadal is getting the best competition early on. I've got him beating Alcaraz. I think it's going to go 5 sets. I also like the fact that Alcaraz beat him. So now Nadal has that extra incentive, that motivation to prove to the kid at his, favorite event of the year that he can get it done. I've got Nadal over Alcaraz, and I'm going to go with a little bit of an upset. I know I said Tsitsipas is the best bet. I still believe that because I think if he gets to the final, he has a better chance to win it than the guy that I'm taking to upset him. I'm going to go with Sinner. I just really think this is going to be kind of like my hockey picks in Edmonton coming out party. This is my Sinner coming out party, and I think that he's going to beat Tsitsipas, get to the final, Nadal versus Sinner, and there I have Nadal winning pretty handily. I just don't think that's a great matchup for Sinner, and I'm taking Nadal to get 22, even though I think Vegas would say be careful on this one.
I have the same view of Nadal as I do of Swiatek. If you don't get Nadal in the first couple rounds, look out. Yep. Same for Djokovic, actually, honestly. And part of me does think that we may not see this Nadal-Djokovic match. I think there's a decent shot that one of them gets picked off. And obviously, through my picks, it might be Djokovic. But they do both look like and Djokovic looks like he's playing at an amazing level. But for Nadal, like Swiatek, if you don't get him early, look out. The one interesting thing I would say, it's a matchup for the old school, for like 10, 15 years, maybe 10 years ago. But second round matchup, he just came back from injury. Nadal set to face Wawrinka. If Wawrinka can get out of that first round, he's owned Wawrinka when he's faced him in the past. So I don't think that's a huge obstacle. But just some interesting things to watch because I think there are some banana peels that could possibly go early on. But I do like Nadal. So we both have Nadal. We both have Swiatek. We do have some other surprises along the way happening, but that looks like the final picks. Any last thoughts on this tournament from there before we go?
I think this is the most excited I've been for the French in a long time, just because on the men's side, it's wide open. And even as much as we think Swiatek is probably a foregone conclusion, the women's side, the women's side always just, it gets crazy in some way that we don't see coming. There's going to be, some things that just pop out of nowhere, which will make it very interesting. But I think this is going to make for some classic TV with the men's and the women's. It's going to be really entertaining.
Yeah, I agree on the women's side. You just really don't know. That's amazing that you have, I mean, it's such little value with Swiatek because of that fact, because even though she's on fire, you just never know what's going to happen. She's not Serena the way Serena was when she dominated, and you just had no way of envisioning her losing. Swiatek's playing unbelievable right now, but that could easily, somebody could trip her up. There are a couple people waiting to do it who've done it. And then, like we said, the big three in there, Nadal, Alcaraz, and I'd be really interested to see the odds on Nadal, Alcaraz, Joker versus the field. Like, I'd love to see that. And we basically have that. We could do it mathematically if we had time, but it's not worth it right now.
And the one other thing that I will say is, and we haven't touched on this yet, let's take Alcaraz out of the equation. If we get a Joker versus Nadal matchup right now with Rafa on 21 and Joker on 20, this is as big of a legacy match as you're going to see, because if Nadal can get to 22, I know it doesn't seem like much, but they're getting older. We don't know what's going to happen potentially with anything pandemic related, or Joker having to miss any future majors. If Rafa gets up by 2, that is significant, because I'm kind of looking at this as Rafa's last stand. I'm not sure I would pick him to win any more majors if he wins this one, but it's huge for both of those guys. If Joker finds a way to get to 21-21 by winning this event, I mean, I think it's pretty easy to say that he will end up being the all-time leader eventually, because the slate just plays out to his advantage.
The Australian Open was so big for Nadal, because I remember at the end of the US Open last year going, okay, I expect Nadal to somehow win 2 more Frenches as long as his health doesn't fall apart. But I think Joker can win 2 or 3 of some others there. But now he's got the Australian and probably still a good chance to win at least this French and maybe next year's French before health really comes into effect, or before Alcaraz turns into the most scary player we've ever seen in our lifetimes at the French Open. So I find that to be really interesting. And you're right. We thought it was a huge legacy match last year. It was an unbelievable match. I really hope we get it this year. Tennis is the only sport where I find myself actually rooting for the favorites, because the matches are so good. So it'll be interesting to see, and we'll keep our eye on it. Hopefully our best bets will come through, and we'll be looking a little better on the other side. Hockey picks are doing okay. Our baseball picks are off to a decent start, so we'll see where we go from there. Thanks again for joining our recap, or our preview of the French Open, and we look forward to doing more. We'll see you guys down the road with Wimbledon and some other events.
Thanks, everybody.